Hi, everyone. Um, my name is Sophie Rosenberg. I joined LSE as a fellow in International Relations Department this past October. I joined from the University of Oxford, Trinity College, where I was a research lecturer in politics in IR. I'm delighted to share my feedback for today's seminar on Marissa Kemp's paper. I'd rather participate live, but I have an IR410 seminar I teach at the same time, unfortunately. But I'm happy to take advantage of the recording and Zoom to share my thoughts and kickstart the discussion. And I can discuss with Marissa further at a later time for any clarifications or questions based on my feedback. So thank you to Marissa for sharing the draft chapter with us and for flagging certain questions that you have already to guide our discussion and to make it useful for you. So I'll make sure to provide specific feedback on those questions you raised. Especially on the question of ontological security and the scope of the rest of the chapter that you're continuing to work on. I'll start by saying that I haven't worked on this topic before of the human-tech relationship in the context of military operations and bringing in the agency of and individual experiences of human service members into an understanding of military practice. So my feedback comes from a non-specialist background, but I think that there's value to having some distance from the topic in giving feedback as well. So before jumping in, I should underline that I thought the paper was very well written. It was a pleasure to read. It raises really interesting questions on the anthropomorphizing of technology. Not only that, but of the latest robotic technologies that raise pretty unique questions, pretty unique issues. And these questions relate to classic questions of the human-technology relationship, but with a thoroughly modern angle when you bring in the autonomy of these technologies as well. So it's questions I hadn't thought about before, but it was an eye-opening read. So thank you. And I appreciate how the chapter is framed broadly as highlighting the tensions between two dimensions. On the one hand, the mainstream view of the technologies, which is the kind of instrumental focus of what the technologies can offer, the liberating the human from the dull, dirty, and dangerous tasks, and allowing them to focus on exercising their unique human skills, such as ethical decision making, kind of liberating the human through these technologies to do what the humans are uniquely capable of. So on the other hand, the actual user experience in opposition to this instrumentalist view. So the user experience, the actual human behavior, the emotions, the expectations that arise when individuals interact with and use these autonomous technologies. So in doing so, highlighting how the mainstream view obscures this more experiential individual dimension. The implication being that the reality of what technologies can do and how they're used and the impact that they have on military culture and on individuals is divorced from how it's imagined to work. So I thought that was very helpful to kind of frame the paper. One suggestion would be, I think the instrumentalist view could be fleshed out in a bit more detail. It could provide a fuller contrast with the experiential dimension that the chapter really focuses on. And it can help kind of structure the argument about how it influences a service's values and cultures and a service member's self-identity. And it could kind of bring the state back in a bit, and that mainstream kind of conventional understanding behind the deployment and development of these technologies. I wanted to start at the questions I have at the empirical dimension first. I found myself asking, what's the scale and scope of the empirical phenomenon we're discussing here? So the scale, it would be helpful to give a bit more background on the scale of the commemorations quite early in the chapter. So what kind of commemorations are we talking about? What specifically, are we talking specifically about kind of the non-formal soldier-led commemorations? How many robots have been commemorated in any fashion? The three examples mentioned in the text, Boomer and Scooby-Doo, they're more kind of, they're less official state-led commemorations, more individual. Um, One point I thought was really interesting was towards the end of the chapter, which talks about the importance of collective recognition, as it legitimates one's feelings and reinforces a group identity, and that we rationale. And I'm wondering, is the we a collection of soldiers? Is it the individual kind of abstracted from the collection? Or is it the military, the state, the official part more generally? So far, it seems like the commemorations presented in the text are ad hoc, kind of informal. I just wanted a bit more clarification there. Is there any formal way that the institutions commemorate these technologies? They're very new, so I'm not sure. Are they referred to in any government statements, in any kind of ceremonial fashion, press releases, anything about these technologies? To me, the distinction would help sharpen the focus of the chapter because they raise different analytical questions, especially the question, are we talking about the soldier-technology relationship exclusively, or are we talking about the state-soldier technology relationship? And I'll come back to that question a bit later on. A bit more helpful background for the reader would focus on the scope of the subject. So I found myself asking, what technologies specifically is the chapter referring to? Because I sensed some conflation in how the technologies were referred to. The chapter starts by saying new technologies, and particularly AI-enabled autonomous military robots. And a few of these are highlighted: Boomer, Scooby, Johnny 5, bomb disposal units, page 11. These are highlighted as the means to achieve corpseless and casualty-free war. The robot becomes unique to its team, and there are complex emotions about this, especially about its destruction or separation from the soldier. So we're focusing on this human-robot relation, but then the chapter also includes different technology like night vision goggles. At the end of the chapter, I know it's not finished, but at the end, when it starts presenting the interview material, it highlights the respondents' experiences to their use of night vision goggles. And I just suggest reviewing to make sure there's coherence and clarity in how the different types of technologies are referred to. At the very least, it would avoid conflating technologies and can clarify any confusion for the reader. But on a more analytical level, I wonder if the analysis should make a distinction between the types of technologies, because to me, there's a substantial difference between AI-enabled autonomous military robots and weapons and other technology like night vision goggles. And it has analytical implications because revolving around the notion of distance from the military operation. So technology like night vision goggles enhances the ability of the human soldier to fight on the ground in a military operation. It amplifies the soldier's power and capacity, capabilities. To me, there's a similarity, I guess, between the night vision goggles and the rifle that you mentioned. It's a continuity, kind of an updated version of the rifle, in that it enhances the capacity, the strength, the power of the soldier on the ground. But the soldier is still on the ground. And I asked myself, is this then just an extension of the soldier technology relationship that we've been used to for quite some time? As the tech gets better, the soldier tech relationship is adjusted, but not really substantively different than before. Whereas the AI-enabled autonomous military technology like the robots raises unique questions because it enables the distance between the soldier and the operation. It enables the soldier not to become more powerful on the ground, but to remain far from the military operations. And I found it interesting how the chapter flagged the controversy around commemorating service members' achievements in remote operations and how an R was added. And it flags that uniqueness and the kind of the controversy, I guess, the contestedness within the military as of yet. So this is more clearly linked to the instrumentalist view presented in the overarching tension that I mentioned in the beginning, the instrumentalist view of what the tech can offer by, can avoid the dull, the dirty, and the dangerous, and the actual experience of the soldier as the user of the technology. So that kind of distance goes with avoiding the dull, dirty, and dangerous. And I think there's analytical richness to this, to analyzing this technology that enables distance and remoteness. And that the tech that enables that actually becomes a unique member of its team. But it was built for ultimately destruction and being damaged and destroyed, especially when we're talking about bomb disposal units. So that human robot relationship, focusing on that specifically, kind of easily answers the question that can be raised: is this just an updated version of the soldier rifle relationship? Because it highlights the novelty that this new technology brings of AI and autonomous technology. It also raises interesting questions about the state's relation to war and combat, in and the changes in how wars are being fought when we rely more on surveillance drones, on armed drones, on lethal autonomous weapons, etc. An area that's still quite blurry. Um, in in how it enables the state to provide more protection to its soldiers with this kind of robots that take care of the bomb disposals, puts humans at less risk. At the same time, there's inequality and the vulnerability in war. Become the soldier is operating the weapon sitting very, very, very far away from the operation theater, very far from the targets and the civilians on the ground. I know that this is beyond the scope of the paper, but that idea of remoteness is quite analytically rich potentially. So I wonder if the analysis would benefit from focusing more precisely on the AI-enabled technology, or at least make a distinction between the types of technologies we're talking about. Maybe you think I'm overthinking the difference, and by all means, but and maybe it's less about kind of avoiding the dull, dirty, and dangerous tasks, but just kind of overcoming human limitations. And if that's the case, then I guess the night vision goggles and the AI-enabled autonomous technology kind of fits in the same broader category. And if that's the case, just make sure there's coherence in how the paper addresses the relationship and not kind of conflates all the different technologies. Moving on to the theoretical framing of the chapter. Marissa, you asked us to comment on whether ontological security is a useful frame to understand the purpose of robotic commemoration. I see the concept of ontological security is brought in on page 16, and it specifies that it uses the original definition of ontological security as focusing on individual identity rather than the scaled up version of the state level narratives of selfhood. The argument is commemoration is both a means of legitimizing emotional attachment to technologies and maintaining ontological security. So I suggest 2 points. I'd love to read the rest of the paper that presents the material from the interviews, because so far the argument that the human-tech relation impacts the service culture, in some cases challenging a service's core values, and it impacts the individual's self-understanding and conceptions of professionalism, hasn't really been fully illustrated yet. And I'm really interested in knowing kind of how are these contradictions or challenges illustrated? How has the relationship influenced an individual's self-understanding or an individual's conception of professionalism? How? So answering the question of whether ontological security is a useful frame, which you asked us to comment, I guess depends in part on what can be drawn from the interview material. So far, I can see its potential and how it could work. If you have the material to illustrate, for instance, how you say, how individuals' identity narrative can be disrupted by events, resulting in anxiety that can be managed by returning to habits, customs, and traditions, in this case, commemorative practices. So I could see how it works. It could work, but it really depends on the interview material, if it enables you to illustrate this in detail. But what I can suggest at this point is to clarify the conceptual framework, perhaps under the broad umbrella of ontological security, because it seems there are several concepts doing work here and that are being used. There's ontological security, there's the connection between culture, self-identity, the post-phenomenological concepts of multi-stability and technological mediation. The last two weren't really fleshed out yet, and they should be specified, not entirely clear what is meant by the post-phenomenological concepts of multi-stability. And it's not clear to me how they all fit together yet in kind of a streamlined conceptual framework. So I suggest clarifying the relationship between these concepts, perhaps streamlining it by even taking one or two out or subsuming some under others, just kind of clarifying for the reader, and to avoid potential kind of overlap or underdevelopment of some of these concepts. My final suggestion is a question. To what extent is the state involved here? How can it be brought more closely into the study of international relations? Is the story limited to the soldier-tech relationship? Or is there an underlying story about the state-soldier-tech relationship? Is there a story perhaps about the informality of these commemorative practices, how it's done by individuals, soldiers so far, and at the same time, the parallel lack of official commemoration by the state and the military services, as opposed to how they formally and officially commemorate other types of technology, planes, ships, and other technologies. I feel like the underlying thread about the disjuncture between how states view technology as instrumental in achieving military goals and the concurrent erasure of human experiences from this process of state making war. And that story being explored through the human-tech relationship, I think, is a really, really interesting one. But I wonder if that state-soldier-tech relationship could be foregrounded a bit more, and used more so as a thread throughout the chapter rather than just appearing in the beginning. So those are my points of feedback, suggestion on the empirical, the analytical, and the conceptual, theoretical dimensions of the paper. Now, you might have already started to address these as you've prepared the next bit of the work on the paper, or maybe you've addressed these in other parts of the thesis, I don't know, but I hope it's helpful and I hope it kickstarts a constructive discussion. I wish I could be there with you, but I wish you all the best for the rest of the chapter, and I'll send my feedback to you via email as well. So I'll pass it back to the conveners now, and we'll finish this recording, but thank you very much.